love that we're able to connect with folks literally all over the world. So I'm sure you know, but my name is Dan Jones, and I have recently written the book Modern PBL. And I love it. Thank you, Terry. Woohoo! I've got my copy right here. So I'm so excited that you guys have joined me for today. We're going to jump into a lot of the planning pieces of setting up a PBL unit or a PBL classroom. And all of these pieces and parts are really vital to making sure that that PBL process goes well. So I'm going to go ahead and pull up my presentation. And just so you know, I do love it when people interject and chat, so that if there's a question that you have during the session, I can try to address it in real time. Trying to navigate, the presentation plus the chat plus the waiting room can get to be a little overwhelming. So if you have a question, something you'd like to share, make sure just ask, and it'll help us to get to know each other, flesh out some ideas, and make sure that everybody's on the same page. Hopefully you have a pen, pencil, computer open with a Word document, something, so that you can jot down some notes as we go through this. And we'll go ahead and get rolling. Let's see. All right, so part one of this three-part series, this is Foundations of Modern Project-Based Learning. So as far as my journey in education, I just finished my 19th year in the classroom, looking forward to starting year 20 here in a few months. But I have been flipping my class. I'm a flipped classroom teacher. I've been doing that for about 11 years. I'm also a podcast host. The two shows that I'm a part of are What Works, and we just talk about things that work in the classroom. And then there's also the AI Cafe, where we talk about all things dealing with AI in education, some of the struggles that we've gone through with it, some of our concerns, as well as our excitement and passions for it. So on that particular program, there's a teacher from Turkey, or a professor from Turkey. There's a technology specialist from New York. There's a professor from Massachusetts. There's a podcast production. He's our producer, but he talks to thousands of educators. And he's on that show as well. And we just love talking about AI. This is my second book that I've authored. My first book was Flipped 3.0 Project-Based Learning, an Insanely Simple Guide. And that really just takes you through flipping your class and how to do that with project-based learning. And we'll get into flipped learning in our third session. That's one of the more, like, I would call, advanced aspects of integration into PBL. And then, my current book, which is Modern PBL, Project-Based Learning in the Digital Age. The other thing is I am an enthusiast for AI. I love it. I think that there's so many aspects for it in the classroom. So my journey, though, I started out, I was going to be Teacher of the Year. I was so excited about being in the classroom and being energized. And then about 8 years into that journey, I hit a wall, and I just did not enjoy teaching at all. My classroom was a frustrating place. My students were frustrating. They didn't like me. I didn't like them. I didn't look forward to coming to work. And I was just really, really burned out. And there was no joy in teaching at that point. And I had gone to my administrators and I had just said, hey, I think this is going to be my last year. To which both of my administrators, my principal, my superintendent at the time, said, no, we're not going to let you quit. You just need to find a different way to teach. And one of my first questions was, well, how else do you teach? You tell kids what they need to know, they memorize it, they spit it back to you on a test, and then you press repeat. And one of the things that they said was, I'm not real sure, but I know that you'll find it and it'll reignite your passion for teaching. So I really, as I journeyed into finding new and innovative ways to teach, that's when I stumbled across project-based learning and flipped learning. And so the more I invested in both of those areas, the more my passion was reignited. And I absolutely love being in the classroom. I love teaching. Doesn't mean that there aren't difficult days, but on a grand scheme, I love what I do. I love being able to work with students and really work beside them and help guide them through the learning process. So our agenda for today, we're going to be looking at essential questions. We're going to be looking at planning, how to introduce or the reveal of a unit or a lesson to your students. And then we're going to go through some of the students' first steps, that once the lessons have begun, what are some of the first things you're going to have them do? So the first thing we need to do, though, is we need to define what PBL is. I have looked at various definitions and none of them really told you what PBL was. They told you about PBL and none of them were wrong. None of the definitions were wrong, but I didn't feel that any of them were complete. So I redefined PBL, and that is the act of using a project to develop hands-on engagement where students who are fueled by their curiosity and passion work collaboratively to explore, absorb, and internalize classroom content beyond rote memorization. So to me, that was a much more solidified, oh, I can identify when I see that. That made more sense in regards to what PBL is. Any questions? Make sense? Okay. So what I want you guys to do is, one of the first things is, what's one classroom project that could effectively empower students to take the lead? What's something that you do in your classroom where you could say, you know what, I'm going to give this to the students. I could easily see my students taking off with this, running with it, and absolutely loving it. And so how does it stand out as a particularly suitable choice for student-driven learning? I want you to think about that. Before, I'm not going to jump on you. I want to give you guys about a minute or two to really process and think through your own classroom, or if you're not a classroom teacher and you work with teachers, what's a unit or theme or something that you think, you know what, this would work really, really well for students to really take that lead and own, and so that they could truly it could be student-centered and they could run with that. So think about that for a few minutes before we move on. And I want, as you think about that and you've identified that, we're going to come back to that particular theme or unit later on, and you're going to have to do other things with it. So just keep that in mind. And yes, I will absolutely share the recording. We're going to record all 3 sessions. All right, let's jump to essential questions. Now, I had the opportunity to speak with Jay McTighe, who he is one of the leading experts on universal design for learning. And he is just a mastermind when it comes to the development of essential questions. And what these are, they're open-ended questions that require students to engage in that higher order thinking. And it leads to a deeper understanding about the unit of study or a specific subject area. There are 3 different types of essential questions. And your broadest one is, it's like a broad light of understanding. So the analogy that I'll give you is, imagine the sun. The light of the sun just goes in all directions. It's not a beam of light. The light just goes kind of everywhere. So it's very broad, encompassing a lot of different things. And then we have topical questions, which are applied to a specific context and give depth. And then we have guiding questions, which offer more of an immediate, actionable step for your students to follow. And so, like I said, there's an overarching essential question, there's the topical question, and then there's guiding questions. And I represent these as like the sun, the earth, and the moon. So you've got your sun, and the earth is rotating, around the sun. So your topical essential questions are connected, but they rotate around that main essential question for your course or for your class. So it could be, there's a very broad question that you could ask that everything's kind of connected to. So your topical essential questions rotate around that main essential question. And then you've got guiding questions. And those guiding questions are like the moon rotating around the earth. So they're connected. Those guiding questions truly are connected to your topical essential questions. So they just kind of get smaller and more narrow as they go. But instead of, we have this, the sun is just massive, and it's a really large question that can't be answered by a single unit or a single lesson. And your topical is more of a unit of study that goes around that sun. And then within that unit, you have lessons, and those lessons each have a guiding question. So that's how they rotate. Does that make sense? Okay. So overarching essential questions, again, it could span various content areas or an entire course. So, I mean, truly, if you have, I picked a science question for this one. How do individual actions contribute to global environmental outcomes? Well, you could address that question in an ELA class or in a language class, and reading, and have books centered around that specific question. You could address it in a science class. We could look at the historical connections to individual actions and how those individual actions throughout history have connected to that. So it is a very large question that could connect to, an entire wing of the school. So like our middle school could all be addressing this particular question. So then when we look at topical essential questions, going off of that same, science essential question, what effects does recycling have on decreasing my environmental footprint? So it connects to the original question. It's more specific to, say, a science classroom. So this particular topical essential question, it's going to resonate with students' interests. It's going to instill this sense of lifelong learning. It'll align with your curricular concepts. And those are things that I pulled directly from Jay McTighe, Grant Wiggins, and it transforms the class into this active learning space because everybody's working towards answering this one question. They're not looking to earn a grade. They're looking to answer this question. Their desperate interest is answering the question. And the way that they're going to go about that is going to be very individual. So it's going to transform your classroom into an active learning space. It's making the learning process more engaging and effective, and they understand the purpose behind what you're asking them to do. So this question, you'll notice it's not a yes or no question. It can't be answered very condensely. It's something that is going to expand throughout the entire unit that you're studying or the entire standard that you're going to be addressing. But then we hit those guiding questions. And these are the questions, like I said, when you have certain lessons throughout that entire unit, these are going to be directed at a specific lesson. This is a question, when we're done with this lesson, you should be able to answer this question. So it's immediate, actionable steps for students to follow. It helps provide them with that roadmap of where they need to go within their project, within its development. So if we look more specifically, we're looking at how does the process of recycling work and why does it help the environment? So looking very specific at the process of recycling instead of what effect does recycling have, it's much more specific. So I want you to think through that topic or unit that you had originally thought, you know what, this would be great to hand over to the students. How could you use an overarching topical essential question to help front load and spark greater interest? So if you were to give your students that question and say, go find information, how would you answer this question? What could you find out? How is that going to spark interest and really more passion in what the students are learning? Any thoughts so far? Terry, can I pick on you?
Sure.
Awesome. So what are you thinking so far with what we've covered?
I think it's really good. I started using a little bit of PBL years ago because I retired 5 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But I know that this would be good to help, especially the older ones going, oh, how can I, do something?
Well, and a
So,
lot of times it's kind of like, well, why do I have to learn this? I'm never going to use this in my life. I'm
right.
never going to use this content. Why do I have to invest in this? And a lot of times if we allow students the opportunity to say, you know what, you get to design what it is how you're representing your understanding. If they can bring those passions into what they're learning, And we've given them the freedom to do that so that they know that going into a unit or into whatever they're studying, into a class. And we say, you know what, you have the ability to take the things that you're already interested in, and that's what I want you to use to represent your mastery of content. There's going to be much greater buy-in to what they're learning. And if we front load using those questions and say, all right, here's a topic, go investigate, go learn, and we haven't even started the unit yet, but I want you to come back with some knowledge. All of a sudden, our students aren't starting empty-handed. They know stuff before the unit's even begun. And so kids who maybe have struggled in the past, we've now given them a foundation to build off of. Abir, that's a great question. And having students help formulate these questions is a great way. You can help guide that process, but including them in that is a fantastic approach. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. I think it's good for you as the teacher to kind of have a general idea of what you want the students to cover. And that way you can help guide that much more effectively, especially if you're dealing with littles where this might be more challenging. But if you're dealing with like middle school, high school age students, absolutely including them in that process, because again, it's just going to ramp up their investment in the process. And Lois, that's fantastic. Absolutely. Asking the students, especially littles, what do you want to know? What are things that you all would want to know about this topic? And what have you wondered about? And we're going to get into that wonder piece here in just a little bit. All right, so developing essential questions. There's a QR code up at the top. And if you have your phone and you are able to scan that, you can access this particular document. And it literally walks you through crafting essential questions for use in your class. And you could use this to help students design those questions as well. So I do have a document that I'll put in the chat that has links to all of these things. So if you don't have a phone on you and you're not able to scan the QR code, that's okay. I'll get that to you. But this is a document that you'll have access to. And it really is helpful if you go through every single step and really process how you can develop these for your specific content area, class, and it'll enrich your units drastically. Now, when we look at planning, I love this quote by Alan Lakin. It's planning is bringing the future into the present so you can do something about it now. The idea of making sure that whatever we're covering in the future, I'm addressing it right now. Planning, it's that architectural blueprint, guiding learners to construct their understanding piece by piece, ensuring a robust and coherent structure to their educational journey. It's really looking at all of the details of what's going to happen within a unit or within your course and making sure that you are designing everything on purpose. So we'll go through this kind of step by step. We're going to begin with the end. So we'll deal with standards. We're going to look at learning objectives and end goals, timetables, making sure we have a contingency plan. And we are going to look at the introductory activities, that real world connection. So let's begin with the end. When we do this, we all have things that we have to teach in our classes. And so we look at the core standards and skills. And it's really, really helpful if you can map out specific standards. And one of the wonderful things with PBL is that if you want to go to the teacher across the hall who teaches different content than you do, ask them, about different standards that they're teaching, plan together. And that way, if you need to take more time on a particular unit, you're covering more standards. It's not that you have to get through this unit in 2 weeks because that's all the time you have to spend on it. And we can't take any more time than that. And PBL cannot be rigid. There has to be a lot of flexibility in the amount of time that you cover particular content. So if you can cover multiple standards within one PBL project, fantastic. It doesn't have to necessarily be nailed down to one single standard, and that we're doing just that one standard within our unit. Absolutely, Catherine. When she said, looking, or maybe ask the students what makes ancient Egypt unique, and then break them up into different groups. You've got government, art, religion, the hierarchy, afterlife, all of those different things, and ask them to then rotate. So they're covering a lot of different things about ancient Egypt. And again, you could bring literature into that. You could bring science into that, math, all of those various content areas can be a part of that one PBL project. And it's something that is, again, going to be student driven. Students see how social studies connects to science and how it connects to math and how all of these things are interconnected, and it's not isolated to just one subject area. So you design assessments as well. Now, a lot of times when we think assessments, we think tests. But when we look at formative assessments, a lot of PBL is done through formative assessments and checking in with students. So how will you check in with students to identify their mastery, gaps in their understanding, as they progress through the content? It's really important. There's a lot of dialogue that's going to happen within a PBL classroom, whether that's peer-to-peer or student to teacher, teacher to student. It goes back and forth a lot. And there's going to be a lot of talking, a lot of checking in. I check in with students daily by circulating around the room and just making sure, that they understand what has been covered. Because if you can catch it in real time, any sort of misconception that they have regarding the content being covered and how that's going to be applied to their project, because you don't want them applying misinformation to their projects. You want to be able to catch that as quickly as possible, so that they can apply it appropriately. Standards mapping. So that macro perspective, that essential question that we have at the beginning, it's that 60,000 foot view of content that you're teaching. So if you were to look down 60,000 feet up, you would be able to see how everything's going to be connected. All the pieces and parts, this unit goes with this unit, it connects here to there, and you could see how it relates to science and how it relates to math and social studies and all sorts of different areas. And so you have this very broad perspective, and then you're going to get in, you're going to say, okay, now we're going to develop those units. This is how I want to focus those particular standards, the order in which you're going to present those standards, how does it scaffold, what makes the most sense, develop your topical essential questions that go with that. And then from there, you can break down into your lessons and focus on very specific topics within the standard or standards that you're going to integrate. So one of the things I integrate into a unit of study are mastery checks. Students take a mastery check, and for me, they can take that mastery check multiple times because I want them to master the content. And if they don't master it the first time around, they at least know what they need to go back and study. And if they master it the second time, fantastic. There's no penalty for that. I want them to learn content, and that is what they're doing. And this just gives them the opportunity to do that. It's not a pass-fail, and we move on, regardless of what the outcome was. You need to pass. You need to understand the content that's being covered so that when we move forward, you're moving forward with a solid foundation. You know what you're doing. Learning objectives. These are your compass that guide students through their inquiry. So rubrics are really important. I wrote a piece recently about rethinking rubrics and what their purpose is in the classroom. I really like the idea of a narrative rubric. It removes well, you got a 1 or a 2 or a 3 or an A, a B, a C in this particular category. It removes that, and it gives students an opportunity to say, I feel that this is my degree of mastery right here. And then there's an opportunity for you to provide feedback. And with a narrative rubric, it's not an end of unit assessment. It's not a checklist for students to go through and say, this is how I get an A on this particular project, or how I have pass this class. And Lois, yes, I do. I most certainly have an example for you. It's on my next slide. So this allows you to provide feedback to students throughout the process of their project. It allows them to get that feedback so that they know, oh, I need to ramp things up in this particular area of my project to really demonstrate mastery. And then I can do that before the end of the project. I can actually know how to be more successful before it's done. And you're able to provide that feedback immediately for the students. And again, SMART goals. I think a lot of us have heard or use SMART goals, but it's just being very specific with your students, having goals that are measurable, achievable, and please understand, achievable is so important. And being able to set students up for success so that they can do this. And if you can guide them through that process, you can help them achieve the goals that are set. This needs to be relevant to their lives, which by including the students in the process of designing their own projects, it brings that relevance out. They're able to make those connections. They're able to see exactly how this applies to them, and it's time bound. So these goals, we need to get there. That's reality. That's a real life skill. We have timetables that we have to get things done in. And otherwise, if you give a student an open-ended project of, whenever you get it done is fine, that's not real. That's not a real world skill. They need to have deadlines that allows them to stay on top and to pace themselves better. And you're going to really be able to help them develop that skill throughout PBL classrooms. So here's an example of a student project rubric. This is a narrative rubric. And oftentimes, traditional rubrics, when they're used for grading, they can hinder what the student is actually learning, because they're trying to check a box with traditional rubrics of I need to do this at this level to get this grade. So we need to start using rubrics for feedback rather than as just a grading tool. Your standards are your rubrics at the end. Students have either mastered that standard or they haven't, or they're approaching it, whatever you want to say. But the standard is your guide for grading any project, which is why you can have 30 different projects in your classroom. Your standard is what you're grading those projects by. But rubrics help students understand the expectations and receive valuable input before submitting their final work. I think that's really important that they get your feedback on something before it's ever turned in. So that if changes need to be made, if they need to do some additional things, that they can. And design rubrics that provide detailed descriptions and expectations. So you'll notice here in the elements, there's the exemplary, proficient, developing, beginning, and somebody may be, proficient. And if they tell you, I feel like I am proficient, this is student feedback on their own work. And then you can provide additional feedback to them and say, you know what? I think you're absolutely right. Absolutely. Or let's revisit this. And so by looking at specific areas, we have building upon prior knowledge, integrating topical essential questions, and then there's critical thinking, use of symbolism. And so, I mean, it kind of builds in that higher, more complex thinking and making real world connections. We desperately want our students to understand the reality of what it is they're working on, and that it's not just a craft, but it is a project. There's a purpose, there's meat to it. So it shifts from the students being completely focused on their grade, and it focuses on feedback. Lois, does that help? Awesome. All right, timetable and contingency. Now, this is really important. I spoke with Ron Berger, and he is brilliant when it comes to PBL and its implementations. One of the things he said was you need to estimate the timetable for a project and then double it, because you're going to run into issues. You're going to have to pause. You're going to have to readdress something. It's not going to just boom, 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 everything falls into place. So it's important that you have some flexibility built into the unit. So you can start with your expectations. You can show them some exemplars. My classroom, there are shelves filled with various exemplar projects that students have done. And it allows them to really look around the room and say, wow, that's really cool. I'd love to be able to do something like that. Or it's just those moments of inspiration, and it shows them this is kind of the level of expectation within the class, because it is important to have an expectation and for students to have something to aim towards. So a lot of this, though, does enable you to move away from direct instruction every single day, direct instruction, to more of a facilitation of the learning that's occurring, allowing students to dive into content, explore that content in ways that make sense to them. You're still not, you're there to help, rein them in if they get off task and whatnot, but you're allowing them the opportunity to research, do inquiry, and really explore things that they find fascinating about the topic or the question that you've presented, so that they can gather as much information as possible. So can you still do direct instruction? Absolutely. There's still a role for that. There's still room for that. but it's not something that has to occur every single day in every single lesson. You can give students that freedom to really explore content in a way that's meaningful to them. So, question I want you to think through is, do I provide enough opportunities for students to make personal connections and express curiosity about the content? Is that something that occurs on a regular basis in your classroom? If it's not, then what are some changes that you could make so that that can occur? Just give you some time to process that and think through that. Any questions so far that I could address, things that maybe don't make sense, or you'd like, excuse me, a little bit more explanation on something?
Hey, sorry, my lighting is terrible.
It's all right.
I'm loving this so far, and I'm just hoping at some point you're gonna be able to give us, here's a project that was really successful in this class, and it seems like we're at the sort of more general mode, right? The big thinking, abstract ideas, or the major
And
things,
we
right?
will get there with we've got 3 different sessions. Session 2 is going to look more at like, here's what the students are going to do in
Okay, good.
class.
Okay,
Our first session here is more kind of laying that foundation, that groundwork for how do we get our PBL unit or classroom structured? How do we really start to build those pieces and parts so that we can get to that point where students are actually able to do the projects?
okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah. All right. So the reveal. This is where you're going to really present your unit, and really open the door for PBL in your classroom. And step 1 is going to be research and allowing students to do that inquiry, that initial inquiry, to allow their curiosity to just run. And then we're going to look at mind mapping. And then third, we'll look at the design lab. And Charlotte, yes, one of the things, and we'll get to that in our third session as we look at AI, because there's a specific tool, School AI, that you could actually program chatbots into your students' native language, and it allows them to really explore and feel comfortable doing so. Awesome. So the research. This particular document helps focus a student during research. Because if you tell a student, I want you to just go onto the internet and find information, they're going to end up watching cat videos because that popped up somewhere and they rabbit trail and they get off task very easily. So you have to give them things to focus their energy and keep them on task. So the research, we've talked about this a little bit already, it front loads the unit that you're going to be studying. It's going to spark that interest. It's going to build confidence because the students are going to walk into the unit and say, you know what, I know stuff. I already know pieces and parts of what we're going to be covering. And they're already going to feel confident in doing that. So it scaffolds the knowledge. This particular document, it helps them to organize information. And one of the things that I do encourage students to do is to find pictures, find maps, find things that are related to the topic that we're covering, and go ahead, print those images out. Get ready to cut them out because we're going to glue them down on a big piece of paper, and it's going to be a very interactive, hands-on activity. So this is all done before we ever get to mind mapping. So this research activity, again, who, what, where, when, why, how, and then there's a wow. And the wow stands for worthy of wonder. So we're going to engage things that they're curious about, things that make them go, or man, I had no idea. And a lot of times when I cover ancient Rome and my students are looking at how ancient Rome connects to modern society, there are things that they're like, I had no idea that's where that came from. And so things that really spark an interest for them, they can write that down in the wow section. So then we get to mind mapping. So they've done their research, and then we're going to do mind mapping. So you can place your topical essential question in the middle, and then you can just put who, what, when, where, or who, what, where, when, why, how, in bubbles around it. For this example, I had already put the topical questions or those guiding questions around it for them to try to fit all of that information and be like, I wonder if it goes with this, or I wonder if this piece of information will show up here. But you can then allow your students to get up and active, because one of the things that happened was my students hated research. They hated it because it was super boring. They just sat at their computers and didn't do anything. And they were looking up answers to questions, but that didn't help the engagement piece. And so I was trying to figure out, how do I make research much more engaging? And mind maps came up, and mind maps are a fantastic tool because it gets kids up out of their chairs, working together and making connections with their peers. So what I did, I just took butcher paper, on those big rolls of paper, spread it out, wrote the questions down, and I even divided it into the kids into teams. So each team had a color marker that they would use. And so you could kind of see how different teams were working together. And it's important that you leave a spot on your mind map for those wow components, the things that are truly worthy of wonder. So the kids can say, I found this super interesting, or I had no idea about this. And they can fill up that entire section with those components. Now, the design lab. The design lab, this is such a critical component as students process information. So they've had time to research, they've had time to write things down, and now we have this huge map that can be posted in the classroom that students can revisit time and time again, whether that's in a kindergarten classroom or at a high school senior level. This could be an active living document that's in your classroom. And the design lab takes all of that information, and now students are going to process that information. So it's an immersive, interactive framework, and it's going to guide students through different levels of Bloom's. Now, we know that Bloom's it's great, but it's not necessarily it's not a true representation of how we learn. It's kind of how we learn. And when we look at Bloom's, yes, there's some basic understanding and remembering, but a lot of times we don't really know what we understand until we go to apply it, until we go to create with it. And then we have to revisit that understanding and remembering. Do I truly understand this? And so Bloom's, it's great to recognize all of those different aspects, but they kind of blend together and move around a lot as students truly work with the content of a class. So the design lab, though, it's going to address different levels, different aspects of Bloom's on purpose. So it accommodates diverse learning needs. So the design lab, one of the things about it is that it's going to meet those diverse learning needs through clear, predictable, pathways that are teacher-led. Because especially when your students are just engaging in a design lab activity,
Blue.
you're
Blue.
going, go ahead.
Hey.
Okay. You're going to have to kind of guide them through that. You're going to need to explain step by step what it is they're doing. So that will help reduce confusion, anxiety about what's coming next. It's very predictable. And you're going to be able to respond because you're going to be listening to all these different conversations that are going on during the design lab. And you're going to be able to respond in real time and be like, you know what, that's fantastic. I want you to share that later. Or, you know what, I understand why you're thinking that, but let's take a different approach to that. And so you can address things in real time. It's going to promote active listening, which is so important. Active learning from their peers, collaboration, because through the design lab, there's some individual work, there's some partner work, there's some group work. So it kind of goes back and forth. There's a lot of movement. There's a lot of talking. And again, I said this before, but a PBL classroom, there's a lot of dialogue that happens within your PBL class. There's a lot of talking. But it's going to facilitate creative and personalized project development. Let's see. Cindy, to clarify, is this when students are designing their own projects? Yes. So we're not dictating projects. Not at all. The students are going to be designing their own, but now we're equipping them with a lot of knowledge, their knowledge of their peers, and they're able to then say, okay, how am I using this information? Because we don't always know everything. When we enter in conversation, we learn a lot from, other people. And so hearing them share information that they found, information that I found being shared with them, that's that part, that exchange that all of a sudden we're scaffolding, we're building all of this framework that they're going to build their project off of. And we're going to build community, and it's going to promote collaboration. So this is what the design lab document looks like. And again, you can scan this and have access to it. I'll provide the link more towards the end. And I understand that we're running out of time because I always do. I always plan for about an hour and a half. But this particular document, it's again, step by step. You'll see step 1, step 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And you're walking them through this process. So each step, you could set it at a particular time frame, or you could, especially when you're first introducing it, it's one of those things where you can introduce it more slowly. You can take a class period to do this. You could take multiple class periods to get them through this. But this is something where students have so much time to convey their information, and then they have that amount of time to listen to their peer share with them. So it goes back and forth. And then, so as we look at part 2, the session that's going to come up next week, we are going to look at the role of direct instruction in our classrooms. And how do we still navigate direct instruction within PBL? Assessing student understanding, working on projects, how do we provide that feedback? How do students do presentations? All of that is going to be part of next week. So I hope you're able to join me for next week. And if you found this valuable, I hope you share with other people, hey, you got to sign up for this, and that we'll have even more folks join us next week. So if you don't mind, I do have a survey to kind of go over, how you feel this particular session went. So you could scan that code, but again, the code is also in this document. I'm going to go ahead and hit stop share, and I'm going to put all of this into let me grab this document real fast. I'll put this in the chat. So if you need to run, it's totally understandable. But I do want to make sure that, you know, if you do have questions, I'm more than happy to hang out for a little bit and chat, and we can talk through some things and go from there. But thank you so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it.